we're all very keen to do that. General Miller, I know that the Air Force has historically been very strong on childcare. Have you had to make any changes to your childcare program as a result of recent staffing changes?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, we have actually. We've had to shift because of the hiring freeze and because the first round of DRP. A lot of our, not the direct child care providers, but some of the individuals that did the training in our child and youth. So we've had to shift some rooms around to make sure that we have coverage. We've had to shift some of our staffing in our child and youth programs into CDCs. Just to make sure that the CDCs are covered. We're working through, as we get through the summer, there's a lot of child and youth programs that we may have to decrease the hours that available. So we have had to make some modifications. What we're trying to do is have the least impact to the family, so there's still availability. The other thing that we have been doing is working the MyCAA, which is military child care in your community. So we have strengthened those relationships with the community. So if for whatever reason we're at capacity in our child care that they can go, we have facilities down in the community in which they can bring their child with some fee assistance. And then we have also tried to strengthen our FCCs, our family child care providers. And we were doing really well. Right now during PCS season, it's going down a little bit, but that's standard. But we've done a very big strategic push on, we've got to have the FCC families there. And that does also get after what Ms. Kelly brought up earlier is the 24-hour and just different programs. So thank you, ma'am.
Excellent, thank you. And while I know the rest of you are not retiring, if you have other ideas on what you'd like us to be doing on childcare, like I said, I think on a bipartisan basis, we all want to make sure we're getting after this. I know Representative Kagans and I represent sort of the two biggest consolidation of military assets in the country, so we hear about these things a lot. And on that note, in representing mostly the sailors and Marines in San Diego, obviously one issue that we've heard a lot about is from the many transgender service members. And while I know you all don't set policy, I did want to know either Admiral Cheeseman or General Barger-Schulte, if you've been able to meet with any of the sailors and Marines that have been impacted by these policies, and if there's anything you've been able to do to foster a command climate that supports all service members through these changes.
Congresswoman, thanks for the question. As you noted, we don't set policy, right? So we execute policy unemotionally. That being said, you asked a very specific question if I met with any transgender service members. I have not. I am confident that we have set a culture in the United States Navy of respect and trust and taking care of every shipmate, and that includes our transgender shipmates. This issue is currently under litigation, so I'd rather not speak anymore, if that's okay.
Understood.
Oh, Ms. Jacobs, it's great to see you. If you remember, we cut the ribbon at Miramar.
Oh, I remember. We're so excited.
You remember? That was so really
it's
excited
still only
about
at like 68% capacity, though. That's why we got to fix the staffing.
It is true. And we're going to build another one there, too. So I think, as you know.
Excellent.
So I would say the exact same as Vice Admiral Cheeseman. Just we're very, we don't set policy. We uphold, the standards that we're given by our civilian leadership.
Awesome. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Crank for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it, and I apologize. I was in our Strategic Forces Subcommittee hearing, which is at the same time. General Eifler, last fall, soldiers at Fort Carson were failed by the Army. Every day, our junior enlisted rely on the services to provide adequate meals at on-base dining facilities, paid for by money taking out of their paychecks for basic allowance for subsistence. Yet at Fort Carson, according to a Military Times article, quote, troops reported being served food that was either improperly prepared or unavailable by the time they reached the end of the line. Kiosks intended to replace dining facilities in some circumstances with grab-and-go options are frequently empty, particularly during peak times when soldiers finish their shifts, unquote. I'm sure you'll agree with me that this was unacceptable and cannot be allowed to happen again at any military installation. An army that's not fed is an army that cannot fight. Can you tell me what was the root cause of these issues at Fort Carson?
Hey, thanks for your concern on this. You're right, it's unacceptable, and those are, I believe, anomalies, but, sometimes we make mistakes, and we own up to it. I think it was a lack of forecasting with the return of forces from overseas in some cases, where they didn't anticipate more people coming into the dining facilities at that time, and I think that was the shortfall. So they didn't have enough, so they had to basically go make more food. Eventually, they sorted it out, but I'm confident that leadership there right now in the 4th Infantry Division of how they rectified that should not happen again. It's a sort of a leadership. It's an organizational. It's a model to make sure you forecast have enough food for everybody that's coming in. I think they just missed that.
Yeah, General Doyle has been a great commanding general at Fort Carson and a good friend, and I do agree that he's done a good job in handling that situation, but it was an unacceptable situation to begin with. So thank you. And then I guess just a quick follow-on to that. How can this subcommittee work with the Army to ensure on base dining facilities that they remain fully stocked to support our men and women in uniform?
Yeah, I think I appreciate what you guys are doing. I'm working with your staff back there on the back wall, what we're doing, especially with some pilot programs that we're looking at, much like privatized housing in a positive light, trying to do some privatizing in the dining facilities where we have a pilot program where, a private company gets a contract, owns the mess hall, the response, they get money that comes from the service members and those that eat in it. So it sort of encouraged them to cook good food and bring more soldiers in. So I think that's a win-win. We're working with some waivers to get contracts in to do that because Department of Education owns that. So we're working with the Secretary of Defense to sort of get a waiver to allow those contracts to come in place. We're trying to do that as early as this summer in about 5 locations. So I think that's one of the ways with your support to be able to get better, higher nutrition, better value for the money that we're putting inside of the dining facilities.
Great. Are there, and I would ask this for anyone on the panel, are there any new authorities that you would need from us or anything that we can do legislatively to help you in that mission?
Well, as I said, one of the things is Department of Education owns the ability to make contracts. And so that's a thing that our secretary is going to ask the Secretary of Defense to get a waiver from the Department of Education so we can do this. So I think any support for that would be probably the best thing. I don't know if there's another.
Yes, sir. I'd just like to comment. The food prices have gone up pretty significant over the last couple of years, right? So I think inflation, the contracts that come in are it's more expensive. So, assistance in, like everything, the 10% pay raise is phenomenal. Now we're more expensive. So it's just, fully funding the top line in the MPMC accounts and the manpower accounts, very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for what you do. I appreciate it. Obviously taking care of the men and women who serve us in the military is important, and we want to support you in everything you do. And General, thank you for addressing this issue, and I just hope it never happens again. But thank you, sir. Yield back.
Thank you. And I believe we have time for another round of questions if you all are willing to accommodate. But I'd like to start just by Admiral Cheeseman, you mentioned medical waiver reviews as one of the things that the Navy especially was looking at. And I know that this is a source of personal frustration for me. I have had multiple parents come up to me who we gave Service Academy nominations to their children. They had taken anxiety medication for 6 months during COVID. It was no longer an issue, but they were denied, they were medically disqualified. When we a huge source of frustration as a nurse practitioner, we ask these kids to ask for mental health help, and then we penalize them. And it's not fair. Most recently, I've been on the phone several times this weekend with the DoD Medical Board staff. We have a young man who was given he had applied to West Point and was told he could not go to West Point because he was medically disqualified. He's in receipt of a Navy ROTC scholarship. He wants to be a Marine. And this young man was taken to the doctor. He was firstborn child. I've had a couple young sons myself. ran around a lot in a classroom in Montessori school, wouldn't sit still. The mom was concerned and brought him to the doctor at the recommendation of the teacher, who said, oh, this kid might have a learning disability. He might have ADHD. So they wrote that down in his chart. He was never medicated. They switched him to public school. He thrived so well, so much so that we gave him a congressional nomination to West Point. And the parents never told the son, and he didn't even remember. So it's now that this has come up, he's had a lot of questions. It's been a struggle for him, but he was reevaluated by our former governor, who was a pediatric neurologist in Virginia, who's also an Army veteran, who said this young man has no learning disability, obviously, no ADHD, just a slight remote history when he was 7, not really documented, not really diagnosed, because even that medical record, I read it as a nurse practitioner, reviewed the entire chart, very inconclusive, very like the 7-year-old boy wouldn't sit still in class. And we will not let this young man be in the military. And I can't explain to you the source of personal frustration as the mother of a recent graduate from the Naval Academy and a mother of another senior at VMI, how that feels, raising sons and daughters and knowing what that feels like when I want to encourage my kids to be in the military. And these are good kids that want to serve our great country. You need them. And we're not letting them in because of this kind of stuff. So this problem needs to be fixed. And I am so not done fighting for this kid. And I'm happy to follow up with each and every one of you in this room to make sure that we give this person in particular. But the Dodmer process needs to be fixed. And thank you for mentioning Medical Review Board reform. But I just want to hear from you guys, because you guys, I hope, are communicating with this. But I am tired of having parents who have children who want to serve, and we don't let them serve because they ask for mental health help. These issues are resolved, or if they have a pediatric diagnosis that is not really validated, certainly not an issue. I mean, I have a son who I took to the doctor when he was 2 because he had a cold, and the doctor said, maybe asthma. That kid had to see a pulmonologist 3 times before he was able to graduate from the Naval Academy. It's wrong. It has to be fixed. So I'd like to hear from each of you about how we are fixing this Medical Review Board process.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of waivers, and the blessing and the curse of MHS Genesis allows us to see everything, and it also allows us to see everything. And I think we have increased our waivers, tenfold probably, to allow people in like you're suggesting. I absolutely want to follow up with you on that, because I don't understand that either. That's something that we're looking at of changing. So we don't have these waivers for these big things. It's small things like you're talking about, things that happen in youth, and it's not necessarily medical either. There's people that have done small crimes and stuff that have been, that as they were a kid, was we call errors in youth, have made. But what we find longitudinally, they are not having a problem once they get in the military. Matter of fact, they're excelling. And so I absolutely want to work with you, but I know our USAREC, especially at a recruiting command, they are processing thousands of waivers this year because they see so much more. But those waivers are also getting approved, and we're very careful of that, but I definitely want to work with you, especially on this case.
The waiver process seems to be inconsistent. In talking to Dodmer, it seems like the service academies each have different things that they are accepting as waiverable, even including ROTCs are different, and what they assume is a waiverable condition. And they said that this was not a waiverable condition. So there's no consistency from what I am understanding, but happy to hear from.
Ma'am, thanks for the question. Very important issue, and I agree with you. At the outset, I would like to recognize the work that we've all done with OSD over the last couple of years to refine what those medical waivers should be. It can't be when you're 8 years old, you had an issue and therefore you cannot serve. There's been a large number of conditions where it's been something clinical in the last year or 3 years, depending on the issue. So it's important. The waiver process itself is cumbersome. If it's in the record anywhere, whether it's a current condition or not, it requires a waiver. So if you broke your arm when you're 8 playing soccer, you must get a waiver for that, even though you may be a state champion soccer player now, right, because it's in the record. So therefore, you're not perfectly clean. So that process, I think it comes down to risk tolerance. Where we have made strides in the Navy specifically is medical officers make recommendations, commanders make decisions. And if we think the future sailor, poses no risk to themselves or the team at Great Lakes or in their first tour, then we're going to waive the condition and bring them on board. So that's how we've approached it. That's how we've refined ourselves. Our attrition rates are at all-time low. It's worth the risk going forward on these conditions as we make, educated decisions on the youth of America.
Thank you.
Again, like my colleagues, thanks for bringing this up. I have personal stories I won't, relay here, but the same type of personal stories where something that, these are the kids we want. These are the tough, gritty, who hadn't had a concussion in a contact sport. But I mean, these are the kids we want. And the waiver process, cumbersome, it gotten better. It has improved. We have not seen, one of the intent of this was to have less attrition. We're not seeing a statistical less attrition with Genesis. So I just appreciate you bringing this up. For us, it's the Department of the Navy. My good friend here, Vice Admiral Cheeseman, said he's going to fix this before he retires, or he can't retire. So it's all going to be worked out.
That's
Fair.
good news for us.
Yes, ma'am. It's the same in the Air Force. I work closely with General DeGoes, our SG, on these. And, to your point, some of these just are, they're unfathomable. It's like, okay, 7 years old, you shouldn't have to do it. And so we have some of the same issues, but we're working through the waivers, and it's just, we need to streamline that process. It is cumbersome to do it, but we're doing it because we want these individuals to serve in the Air Force.
Needs to be reformed.
Ma'am, I'll just add that I think the overall DoD level discussion is the right one to have. The consistency is a challenge. The waivers are helping us through it, but time-consuming, cumbersome, and they lead to inconsistency. From the Space Force perspective, we have a very different way and different model that people are serving in. And so there's some flexibility there, and what we've tried to do is signal to the Department of Defense that there's probably some flexibility to open the aperture here.
It's a new passion project, so thank you very much. With that, I yield to my ranking member.
Sign me up, because I have the same number of stories, and many of my kids' friends and many of my family members have experienced the same kind of just mind-boggling discrimination, I think, on these issues. And so, if there's something we can do to help reform this, I've seen the same thing with the Uniformed Services University as well. So it's broader than this stage right here. I'm going to try to ask what amounts to 3 questions in 4.5 minutes. But in one of them, I just want to know, is it true? Like, this is one of these salacious rumors that a member of Congress wants to know if the answer is true. With the executive order on DEI, I have heard that there is no longer a requirement and that data is being stripped of things like minority identification, whether gender, race, those kinds of things, ethnicity, and that it's going to be not monitoring those kinds of things. And so my question is, first of all, is that true? Second of all, if it is true, how will we ever know if women are not coming into the military as abundantly as they were before all of this was going on, if we're not following those kinds of things? How will we ever know if people are being turned off by joining the military if we are not tracking their ethnicity or their race in the way that we normally would have? Tell me it's not true.
I'm not tracking that. I don't think that's true.
Okay.
Just as you indicated, we know that we have about 16,000 women in the Army. We know that 41% increase of women coming into the Army this last year. So we are still tracking that. I think the things that we were asked to look at was on merit-based promotions, that we're not considering those things. So I don't think that we were told not to track any of that.
Ma'am, same thing for the Navy. Sex, race, and ethnicity is still tracked.
If the answer is yes across the board, I'll save my time. Okay, great. The next question that I have, though, is that there has to be a way that we are looking or trying to measure what I think will be a oppressive reaction that with firings of generals and flag officers who don't have any performance issues as near as anybody can tell, but maybe women or maybe people of color. This has to have an oppressive impact on people. How will we ever measure that, or can we measure that? If we put it in the NDAA, do you feel like you still have the data to be able to do that?
Congresswoman, I'll answer that question from the Navy perspective. So I've recently pulled recruiting and retention data. I live this, I look at it all the time, but specifically to this question. And while there have been firings in the past, there's no impact, no causal impact of retention or recruiting for any subset of sailors going forward.
So if we ask in the NDAA for a report on this, you feel like that you're maintaining and monitoring the data that you would need to be able to see
100%,
that?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, my last question is actually a complete change of gears, and it's for regarding the NRO and the Air Force and Space Force folks. We had this conversation. The Space Force is responsible, as near as I understand it, for putting in some number of billets into the NRO. My understanding from our conversation, Ms. Kelly, is that the Space Force has struggled with that and has asked the Air Force to be supportive of that. And you and I had that conversation as well, General Miller, that you had been in conversation about that. And we both, all three of us, not on the same call, but talked about whether or not you could get some data about what that impact is, and whether or not how many billets are being left unfilled, and whether or not there's a way to reprioritize those, because in the interim, the NRO is without staffing that is, I would assume, necessary.
Ma'am, thank you for the question, and thank you for the conversation last week. The Space Force is staffing the NRO at 80% right now, and that's been consistent over the last several years. So we haven't had a significant reduction in the overall staffing. But what we have had is a challenge trying to meet that number and the emerging mission requirements that are being levied on the Space Force. So it's not so much a billet issue from our perspective, it's a people problem, trying to make sure that we continue to staff the NRO and validate what they need as well as what we need to do to emerge. The thing that I think is really important that sometimes gets lost in the conversation is all of the agreements to staff the NRO predate the stand-up of the Space Force. And so what we've done with the Air Force in partnership and the NRO is come together over the last, I guess, 5 months or so and figure out how do we continue to staff the NRO going forward to make sure they have what they need and that the services continue to have the right trained guardians that can be supported over there.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Cisneros for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to ask about the Brandon Act. It was something that was passed by Congress, signed into policy at DOD, and put down to the services. I've remained pretty close with the Caserta family. This has become a passion project of theirs. You know what the Brandon Act is, right? Is if there's a service member who's having difficulties with mental health and needs help, they're able to go to their chain of command and just basically say, Brandon Act, I need help. And the chain of command is supposed to get them that help. But we're still hearing stories about, enlisted service members, I guess junior officers not knowing what that is, chain of command not familiar with what the Brandon Act is, or if they have heard about it, not really what they're supposed to do if somebody comes to them. It's been a few years now. So how are we implementing this? How are we training and informing our service members, and how are we working with the chain of command, especially our commanding officers, so that they know how to react? And I should include our senior NSO or NCOs too as well, that if someone comes to them and says Brandon Act, how do they get the wheels in motion and make sure that service member is going to be taken care of? And since Vice Admiral, since Brandon was a sailor, I'll start with you.
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. Very important issue and something we cannot take our foot off the gas on. Brandon Act for us and the responsibility to take care of another sailor is part of our accession pipelines. It is part of our leadership schools. So folks are trained to this over time. I don't think we can ever stop training to it because there is constant turnover in the force. We're bringing in 40,000 people this year. Roughly 30 to 35,000 people leave every year. So it's a constant, training as people move into the service, up through the ranks, and then out of the service. Specific to our approach, we developed a mental health playbook a number of years ago that has these types of things in it, and it has a back cover that talks about just this kind of thing for responses to these kinds of scenarios. So we redouble down all the time with our chain of command, with our operational commanders to make sure we keep doing this training, and we won't stop, sir.
Do we have a program, and this is for all the services, really, how are we advertising this? Are we playing it, are we putting billboards or flyers out there, like in the exchange and the commissaries? Are we advertising in an Armed Forces radio or Armed Forces television, or you're overseas? How do we kind of keep ingraining it rather than them just getting it maybe once a year when they come in, or maybe just when they come in, or when they're at a commanding officer school? How do we kind of keep this constantly going so that it's constantly being refreshed in everybody's?
I'll take this one. So to Admiral Cheeseman, it's the same thing. It's continual training at all the different areas and responsibilities. But to your point, we in the Department of the Air Force, we don't have a strategic communication plan on this particular thing. And I think that we absolutely need to, because we talk about getting mental health, making sure that that's part of resilience. And it's important. And if someone says, I need it, we need to have individuals at all levels respond to that appropriately. And so, as you bring it up, I'm thinking that we definitely have it in some of our schoolhouses, but I don't think we have it at every level, and that is the problem. So I think that I took a note down that we need to do a better on our strategic communication plan.
And I think that is the problem there, right? Things that, and we'll have to hear if everybody agrees that, we can do better communicating that and make sure that it's not just at the training, but it's constantly being seen. You go to some of the exchanges and stuff, and you see like, hey, the no smoking things are like the things about if you want to quit smoking, right? Trying to get people, and Admiral, I was a sailor too, right? I think the Navy has done a great job of really kind of trying to get people off of tobacco, and it was during a constant, flowing message, and able to do that. And so I'm hoping we can do the same thing with mental health and the Brandon Act there. Just real quick, and I don't think I have enough time for you to answer this, so I'll take this one for the record. But I would love to hear more about how we can keep people. We spend a lot of money training individuals, whether it be cybersecurity, intelligence, linguistics, and this happens in all the services, and I would constantly hear these stories. They go into these jobs, they're there for 3 or 4 years, and then boom, they're off somewhere else. And I remember the Commandant, General Smith, talking about, well, if you want to get promoted and doing things and move up the ranks in the Marine Corps, you have to go and do other things. But I would love to see it, and if we can get plans of like, if people are in the band, you're in the band. That's it. And we spend a lot of money training people to be in cybersecurity, to be linguistics, to teach them Russian and Mandarin. And why are we only letting them do it? And as soon as they start to get good, we're sending them somewhere else to do something else. How can we create a pipeline that would just kind of keep them in their field and allow them to still promote and be successful? I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and I'll take that one for the record. And with that, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. And the chair now recognizes Ms. Jacob for 5 minutes.
Thank you. So one of the things that we got in last year's NDA was a feasibility study on apartment-style housing for families that could include a child care center. We're still waiting on that feasibility study, so just a flag for your ledge affairs folks. We are tracking that it is late. But also would love to hear from you if you think innovative housing options like this could improve the quality of life for our service members. Obviously, I can tell you, we hear from them all the time that if they knew they were getting their housing right away, they would be fine with it being multifamily housing, especially if it meant they're at a child care center right below and they could walk to base and not have to deal with all of the traffic at the one gate at Naval Base San Diego. But, would really love to hear from you what you think of something like that. Yes. And whoever wants to respond.
Congresswoman, I'll go first. The Navy's working hard to make sure no sailor has to sleep where they work. And core to that is, moving off the ship, moving away from their unit during their free time. A tiered strategy here in an effort to, whether it's unaccompanied housing, privatized housing like you talk about, public-private venture, those types of things. I'm confident that CNIC and the Enforced Resource Sponsor has a plan. What will be very helpful here is authorization for an increased partial BAH. That will entice privatized folks to work with us to be able to provide these options that you speak of. So all in on those types of things, I think it'll be very helpful, going forward, because, we owe a commitment to our sailors so they do not have to sleep where they work.
Not to give my Republican colleagues any too much credit, but that partial BAH approval was in the reconciliation bill, so it might be coming soon.
Thank you.
Did anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I'll just say, innovative approach. I like the concept. I think when you just out at Miramar, when we were there together, when you ask Marines, young Marines, what they want to do, they want to live out in town at times. The rank matters, though. The ones that have proven that they can go out in town and execute like a great American citizen, awesome. Some we're still working on, our more junior Marines, that might need a little more supervision, so the barracks are... punching walls is not good. We frown upon that. But I do think that there's something there. And when you talk to Marines about retention, with our good Marines, we actually have a couple of 200 Marines that we allowed to live out in town, sergeants, and they really appreciate that. That kept some of them in. So I appreciate any innovative approach to make it, the quality of life better, which equals retention, which, like I said, equals lethality and warfighting excellence.
Absolutely. One other question for you, Admiral Cheeseman. We've heard some really good feedback on the deployment resiliency counselors that serve on the ships. We've also heard mixed reviews of some sailors who didn't know they were on the ships or that they had access to it. But I was wondering if you could speak to that program, how you see its role in supporting sailors' health, and if you've seen any plans of cutting back that service.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the question. So I've seen no plans on cutting back that service. I think when you speak to sailors who may not understand that they're there, they're primarily on aircraft carriers or big deck amphibs and not on small ships. So when destroyers and cruisers or small amphibs deploy, they may become disaggregated from that service. So it really takes leadership engagement. If they see a sailor that could use some to set up a virtual meeting or such, but no plans to reduce that core capability. It's pretty important.
Excellent. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And in lieu of a closing statement, I just have a closing question that I'd like each of you to answer. But General, you talked about restoring this value of service in our country, and I'm just curious if you could each maybe give just a word or two about why do young people join the military in this day and age? What is it that is motivating our youth to step up and want to serve their country?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think there's a multitude of reasons. I can't speak on behalf of all of them. There's still an interest for the GI Bill, which is one of the best things out there for as far as the American dream, as I consider it in the military. Being able to do that is very helpful. Also, the lure of coming into the profession and serving, as Mike mentioned earlier, serving something bigger than yourself. There's a lot of people want to be a part of a team. And so that still is inspiring. It's not so much as incentives and bonuses. It's the same thing, sir, that you mentioned, to keep these highly skilled personnel, low density personnel in. They love to do what they signed up to do. The more we can have them do that and get them in to do that, the more satisfied and fulfilled they are. And so that's what we're looking for on our end to make sure they're doing it. But a lot of them are want to serve their country. They want to do some of these things that they can't do out in the civilian world.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, great question. The average age of a new sailor in our Navy is 22 years old, so they're not fresh out of high school. They're finding the Navy a better place for them than in the outside world. Sometimes that's pay, sometimes that's bonuses, sometimes that's housing or education or medical care. But it's to what my colleague said. It is core to the mission. It's the sense of purpose, the sense of getting something done. They want to do the job, ma'am. That's why they're here.
Great, thank you.
Again, thanks very much for asking this, because I think our national narrative has got to champion this. In these hearings, we talk a lot about we're fixers, right? There's things that we need to fix. So we talk about things we need to fix. But that narrative becomes kind of negative. And I think when we talk about the fantastic value of serving something bigger than self, that's why we all stay in. That's why all of us could go do other things, right? And same for you. But I think, specifically for the Marine Corps, I think it's our high standards. you know, we tell, you know, we're fairly confident in our high standards, and we challenge young Americans to be Marines. And sometimes we tell them, I don't think you can do it. And that's why I'm going to, you know, at the same time, I challenge you. And, you know, this is an interesting fun fact. Only 50% of our force is on a bonus for retention. That's pretty amazing. I'm not sure that's, you know, the way it is in other areas, but. Well, I would, sure, and you can tell, right? That's just inculcated, and I think our high
I'll
standards,
take his money.
which we say, hey, if you're going to come to the Marine Corps, you're going to fight. Every Marine does martial arts. Every Marine shoots from 500 yards, a weapon, semi-automatic weapon. Doesn't matter if you're male, female, whatever. Every Marine's going to run 3 miles. Every Marine's going to carry somebody over their shoulder and run through an agility course. I mean, I could go on and on. I know they love it. But I think it's our high standards is what attracts really high-performing Americans to our brand.
And never lower those standards.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
It's so fun to follow you. At least he didn't offer to carry you around like he did when we were in the Senate hearing, which was awesome. But I would say for us, it's most of the airmen that I talk to, it's either to travel, get out of where they are, or it's education. And then, you know, once they get into the service, our retention rates are nearing 90%. And so they fall in love with the mission, and they fall in love with what they do, and they fall in love with serving. So that's why I think that we're attractive to the service.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I would just offer on the Space Force side, the unbelievably booming tech world that we all find ourselves living in, coupled with the same thing specific for space, attracts the best and the brightest, both officer, enlisted, and civilian. We're capitalizing on that. It's the brand cachet that my colleagues have talked about uniquely for their services, and then making sure that that experience actually matches what they're promised, because that's what makes them stay.
Good. And we need to keep those guys too. So I'd like to thank all of our witnesses again for their service and for providing testimony this afternoon. With that, there being no further business, this subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry. Thanks for
No, you
indulging
did
us.
great. You did great. It was great.
Could stay for a very long time.